Hello, and welcome to Reawaken the Dream, a course for the writer mom and other time-pressed writers. We're on lesson 8 already, and we're ready to tackle our third character trait. Can you believe it? We are getting well underway in giving you an extremely practical tool, the character profile that will give you the power of living characters. We've already seen 2 of our characters in action, and we've seen how they can produce drama in your stories. So let's quickly review the trait that we covered last week. Last week, we talked about circumspection. Circumspection was that stranger in town looking all around the tavern, getting the complete lay of the land. It's the ability to survey the entire situation before taking action. We looked at the source of the struggle, and the source of the struggle was the dog with a chain link fence separating it from the food, a scientific study that was used to study circumspection in the dog. And we found out the dog had so much desire for the food that he was unable to take his eyes off the food to see that he could simply walk around the chain link fence to get to the food, because it was just a fence standing there. And so that when the desire gets too narrow focused, then you don't have the broad 360-degree view that you need for circumspection. So we looked at the triad of emotions, and we saw that the struggle was this. The victory, we said, was when you get there, when you get to the top of the hill and you have that sense of power, that sense of mastery of the situation, the self-mastery that is so important. But what about the lost state? The lost state, we realized, just meant you didn't get up the hill. You didn't get the 360-degree view. That did not give you enough power to generate emotions. We had to take a closer look. When we took a closer look at the agents of loss, we saw that there were actually 3 ways that you could lose on circumspection. The first way was greed. The focus gets too narrow, you neglect the circumspection. We said that was a good way to bring down a villain, because a villain does so well. He's got the circumspection and others don't, and he gets too cocky and too greedy, and he forgets to do his circumspection. The second way that you could have a loss in circumspection was temerity. Young people especially, fool rushes in, not aware of all the danger, just not even suspecting the nature of the danger. And the third way that you could lose with circumspection is an enemy called resistance. The way should be clear. There's no obvious problem. Why isn't it getting done? And that is resistance, sometimes called the enemy within. So we can simply block ourselves due to it's too hard, it's too difficult, whatever. And we just do not complete it. So those are the 3 ways that we could lose for circumspection. And so now our triad of emotions was complete. So, are you ready to tackle a new emotion? Let's remember that we're always going to use the order of first giving you vignettes of the emotion that's associated with it, because the ball of emotions that we're looking for is what's real. We're going to give a name to it, and we're going to try to associate that name with that ball of emotions, and then we'll try to disentangle the ball of emotions and do an analysis on it. But the thing that's real is that jumble of feelings. So we always are going to begin with that, and then we'll try to dig it apart and make sense of it in a kind of an academic way. So here's our new character trait. constancy. Now, there's a term we don't throw around every day, constancy. And yet, this is the struggle of everyday life. The alarm goes off and you get out of bed. Constancy. It's bedtime. Time to round up the kids, give them their baths, read the bedtime stories, get them to settle down for the night. Constancy. So let's look at some struggles of constancy and see if we can get a feeling to go with that word, that we will begin to associate with that word. It was late spring, and the weather was starting to turn nice, and she looked at her backyard and thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I just put scallop bricks and just put them on the flower beds across the backyard? Wouldn't that be nice from the side yard to the other fence? That little row of scallop bricks setting off the flower beds. Oh, what a great idea. So Saturday morning, off she goes. We're driving her little car down to the garden center, loads up the scallop bricks. Whoa, that's quite a job. Gets enough in for one load, drives it home. My gosh, you can feel how heavy it is in the car. Gets them unloaded, and she starts digging the trench, putting in the blocks, digging in the trench, putting in the blocks. Weekend goes by, 2 weekends, 3 weekends. It's getting closer to summer. The days are getting warmer, and the job is getting old. Ugh, she can't stop. Now the bricks go 3/4 of the way across the yard. It would look stupid. Constancy. The night was dragging on, and his eyes were getting heavy, staring at the bank of monitors fed by the security cameras at various places in the business, and he struggled to keep his eyes open, wondering if would have been better off to have chosen a more active second job. But he couldn't afford to give in to sleep. He had to stay with it. Empty hallway, empty elevator, empty front entrance, another empty hallway, another empty hallway, empty lunchroom. He couldn't afford to lose his job. The twins had come early, dangerously early, and the medical bills were staggering. He couldn't even believe the numbers on the paper. Where would he be if he didn't have insurance? But even his part, oh my gosh, he'd have lost the house. He might still lose the house if he lost this job. He needed this job to pay the second mortgage. He had to keep his eyes open. Constancy. The conveyor belt set the pace. When he first arrived on the shift, it seemed stupidly slow. But by the end of his shift, it was a relentless driving agent. His work had to be perfect. It was the brake assembly, for heaven's sakes, and he'd been promoted to this post because of the quality work he could do. But boy, it sure got tiring by the end of that shift. Next week, night school was starting up again. He had dropped out of high school. He couldn't bring himself to do the homework. Too boring. He couldn't bring himself to stay in school. Too long, too dragged out. Drop out, get a job, have some fun. Some fun. Well, Next week, night school was starting up again. He'd already earned his GAD, and now he was starting junior college. Conveyor belt of life? You bet. Now he was going to make that conveyor belt work for him. Constancy. She sat in her wheelchair, eyes gazing out the window of her room at the rehab center. The autumn wind was blowing golden leaves along the sidewalk, but she didn't notice the leaves or the impossible blue of the sky that made made Oregon autumns so amazing. She was thinking and pondering what kind of life she might have left. The doctor reassured her that her stump was healing well and that she'd be a good candidate for prosthesis. But still, her hands held onto the menu of her favorite Thai restaurant as they sat on the table set beside her wheelchair. It was her bedside table, but lowered down to chair height. And there she was, with her hands resting on the table, holding the Thai menu. Imagine how wonderful it would be to dig into those wonderful thick noodles just covered in that fabulous peanut sauce. Not on her diet, that's for sure. But she knew from experience that the gatekeepers at the rehab center wouldn't block it. And she debated as she held the menu in her hand and thought about it. Constancy. Constancy. Doesn't that feel, just from the vignettes that we've gone over, that it's about a person thinking about a choice they've made and struggling through to completion? And it seems like it's all happening in a person's head. I thought all of these character traits were based on a source of a struggle that basically came out of one of the lower level brains, the toddler brain, the animal brain, the lizard brain. Where does the struggle of constancy come from? The struggle of constancy comes from the basic survival. It's a basic survival mechanism of the animal. And it has to do with a very important question. When should the animal give up? When should the lion stop trying to follow that prey that's a little too fast for him today? When should the monkey not go out on that all too wobbly limb to get that piece of fruit? When should the antelope give up trying to go back over the already chewed stubble of the drying pasture and set out for another location? These are basic survival choices that animals in the wild must make. They come over, of course, when we add them to our own human brains and our own human minds, our thinking properties, the individuality of every human being, cultural differences. Then they become extremely complex. So let's take a look at the triad of emotions. So let's take a look, for example, first with the nature of the struggle. The nature of the struggle is this: do I continue or do I give up? And it's just as simple as that. Keep going or give up. Keep going or give up. But what about the rest of the triad? Let's take a look at the victory states. Last time when we were looking at circumspection, we had 3 loss states. Well, with constancy, we've got a very easy loss state. Giving up too soon. Couldn't be easier. That's the loss state. But it's the victory state that needs to be broken down into 3 cases. The interesting thing about the victory state is that the 3 states, the 3 types of victory, relate to 3 different types of success, but in each case, we never get there. The first one is when we've created a grand plan. There's some great thing that we set out to do, but it's going to take place in a long distance. It's a long ways away. It's not immediate. We can't sprint to the outcome. It's a long journey. And having made the plan, now we've got to slog through and see it to conclusion. And the way that we succeed in that is when we find joy in the journey. We don't wait until our kids graduate from high school before we first celebrate any scholastic achievement. We celebrate the small victories all the way along the line. And that's how we achieve the victory of constancy, and so that it doesn't become an overwhelming struggle that you simply have to repeat and repeat and repeat the next day. So when there's a prize at the end, too far away to reach, then we establish joy in the journey, and that's how we win the victory on constancy. But sometimes there isn't a great prize at the end. Sometimes the thing that we need to do is either establish an important behavior that we want to turn into something we do regularly, or we want to banish a behavior that's causing us problems. And in that case, there's no oh gee, now we're done. It's something we want to do from now on. So how do you get victory in that? It seems like, woohoo, you won today, so tomorrow you get to do it all over again. No. The way to understand where the victory state comes in, our character profile will actually help us with that. Remember those those rudder traits, the ones in that zone of acceptance where they're consciously in mind? We said that's where the struggle is most totally aware. Well, that's where it starts out when you're setting up a new behavior or banishing one you don't want. But if you want to win the victory, we know from our character profile what we have to do. We have to turn the rudder traits into anchor traits. And when we put them into an anchor position, or even better, into a base position, the struggle is no longer in our conscious mind. We just do it. So that is the victory when we want to establish a new behavior. And okay, I'm going to pretend to be a self-help guru here, but we're talking about characters, so I'm going to phrase it that way. When you have your character say no and mean it, that's it. I'm done with that now. From here on, when no means no, and when the question comes up, is it worth it? You daggone better believe it's worth it. Then you've achieved the anchoring. And let me tell you, that character is going to be a hero, because who among us doesn't have a collection of these things that we routinely crumble in favor of? So write us a hero, and let's get rid of all of these things that are bugging us. Okay, that's 2. But there is a 3rd type of victory in the triad of emotions of constancy. And this one is definitely tinged with sorrow. Did we say the lost state was giving up too soon? Well, sad to say, there's a victory state that gives up. The victory state that involves giving up is acceptance, when there's nothing more to be done, and all there is to do is to accept that it's time to give up. I think we've all been there. I think we all have gone this road with somebody in our lives. And it's hard to think of it as a victory state, but it truly is. And many, many, many a book has been written with this as the highest point of the drama. So there we have them. There's our triad of emotions for constancy. Well, what is there left to talk about? The modifiers for constancy and the group that constancy belongs to. Constancy belongs to the resilience group. The resilience group, all of the character traits that we will discover in the resilience group have in common that they're all standing up to challenges, and the challenges at the animal level are all the very struggle for survival. By the time we humans get to them, it may not really be survival, but the root struggle in the animal model is always going to be the struggle for survival. And so that also answers our question about the modifier, which is the scale. We saw scale as a modifier for orderliness, where we could say, well, how can you get any drama out of orderliness? And the answer was, you have to up what's at stake. And similarly with constancy and with the other character traits that we will study in the resilience group, we'll have the modifier of scale as being how you can up the drama. So with a lower scale, it can just be a pivot point in the story. The point where the character says, by golly, I am going to go back to school. And then things move forward, going from there. The decision is made. So in that point, the case, the scale is lighter, and it simply is a pivot point in the story. Or as we've seen, it can actually be what the whole story hinges on. So what's next? What's next is to revisit our character profile diagram. Oh, haven't we just already learned all of the positions on the character profile diagram? Yes, we have. A, B, those are the rudder traits, the zone of awareness, where the struggle is located. C, D, those were the anchor traits, generally not thought about, they're just generally done. E, F, the wing traits, not usually in mind, not usually accomplished. The base trait, just solid. And the pinnacle trait, poof, off in Never Never Land. So what's more to be said? The interesting thing that is left is to talk about the left side of the diagram versus the right side. What makes A different from B? C different from D? E different from F? And that's compared to all of the other stuff, this is really minor. It's just a tendency. And we'll find that the character traits that go on the left positions are generally reflecting in struggles that happen interiorly in the mind, whereas character traits on the right side of the diagram tend to be exterior traits, traits that take a part in conversations, interactions with other people, sometimes with the interactions with the environment, but usually meaning interactions with other people. So let's take, for example, the the character traits we've seen so far. Last week we looked at circumspection and we saw our stranger surveying the whole room. That's pretty much exterior. We'll probably go on this side. And today we looked at constancy, where it's the struggle of maintaining the path that you set yourself on. That's pretty much an interior trait. And then orderliness. Orderliness was one that we saw potentially being left or right. We saw that it's usually an interior trait. Do I keep my things in an orderly fashion? Can I face this disorder? But sometimes it spills over into the character feeling a need to impose order on others, in which case it would fall on the other side. So that is the remaining information that we have on the character profile. And now we have 3 character traits. It might be an unusual character that would have all 3 of those, because we're going to have 28 different character traits. So it's going to be a while yet before we'll be able to make complete profiles for any of our characters. But in the meantime, we can have a lot of interest practicing these character traits and drilling them, because we really want to come back and review the earlier ones to make sure that all the work that we've done in, so that when we say constancy and it brings up a set of emotions and the sweat almost drips down our face with, oh, I got to go through this, that we want to keep that down the weeks ahead when we're studying other traits. So we want to come back and revisit the traits in our minds, in the stories that we make up while we're doing the dishes. Come back and revisit the traits that we've studied so far. And of course, we're going to have homework assignments. Again, the cards for your note box are covered in the notes, in the PDF lesson notes, and they are available in the PDF that you can get when you sign up for the email list. And as always, when you start working with these traits, if you find that it brings up anything that's really difficult for you to handle, please get professional help. I am not a psychologist, and the only thing I'm really qualified to talk about here is just pretend situations when we're making up stories. So please keep that in mind. So if it gets too much for you, please get help. I can't lead you there, and I can't get you through that. So let's talk about our homework assignments for this week. Now, the first homework assignment is going to concern that joy of the journey. And what I want you to construct is a situation in which you invent a character who has created a wonderful stretch goal that's way off in the distance, and create in your mind how your character, or write it, how your character establishes milestone markers that helps him or her establish the joy in the journey. The next one that I'd like you to take a look at has to do with the strategy to establish an anchor. In this case, I'd like you to invent or write a character that has had repeated failures in some objective that's just a behavior that he wants to get rid of, or a behavior he wants to establish. How does your character push that struggle into the anchor position and make it stay there so that he can get past the daily struggle? The third assignment for the week has to do with acceptance. Now, this time I'm not asking you to go super dramatic, like anything terminal. What I'm talking about here is the character has to accept giving up on a goal that turned out to be unrealistic, and show how that opens the door to a new opportunity that is then open to your character. And the last homework assignment is putting 2 of the character traits together. I'd like you to put circumspection together with constancy. Now, in this case, your character has circumspection in the wing position and has established an unwise goal. And now that it's time to grind it out, this is coming to light in the difficulty with constancy. So this is one that you can look at, and you can either take this as one character with both of those traits, or you can write a dialogue scene where the boss is not so good with circumspection and has established goals that are not realistic for the poor employee who is now faced with the dilemma of, what do I do now? I'm supposed to follow through and this just doesn't make sense. So how would that person talk to their boss? And you could stir in orderliness if you want to. If say the employee is super orderly, how could that help him in his conversation with his boss? So just play with these character traits and get used to the ball of emotions that you want to apply the word constancy to. And next week, we'll come back with another character trait. In the meantime, I'm Kathleen Spracklin, caregiver to the writer mom. So enjoy the week and play with your character traits, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.